Hey there, guys. This is Cole. Welcome back to another horror movie review for the season of October. Today's horror movie I'm going to be reviewing is the 2012 movie Sinister, starring Ethan Hawke, which this is a movie that I had seen before, but it had been a while since I last watched it. I first saw this movie I saw it back in 2022. I liked it then, but, I just decided to recently rewatch it to review for October because currently, at the moment, I'm recording this on September 22nd, and this review will premiere in October. The movie is currently free on Tubi, and I have that streaming service, so I figured might as well rewatch this movie and give it a review. And yeah, I do like this movie, but there is one aspect of it I'm not a fan of, which even though was a well-received movie when it came out, people did criticize the ending, and I agree it wasn't that good of an ending, but other than that, I did like this movie. So what is the plot to the 2012 horror movie Sinister? The plot of the movie is as follows. True crime writer Ellison Oswald, played by Ethan Hawke, is a slump. He has not had a bestseller in more than 10 years and is becoming increasingly desperate for a hit. So when he discovers the existence of a snuff film showing the deaths of a family, he vows to solve the mystery. He moves his own family into the victim's home and gets to work. However, when the old film footage and other clues hint at a presence of a supernatural force, Ellison learns that living in that house might be vital. So that's the basic plot synopsis to the movie. And I will say, this movie does have a really good cast. You got Ethan Hawke as the main character, Ellison. You got Julian Riles as Tracy, Ellison's wife. You got Victoria Lee. You got Claire Foley. You got Cameron Ocasio. You got James Ransone and Nicholas King all in this movie. And the cast all give really good performances in the movie. And this movie was actually directed by Scott Derrickson, who prior to this had directed the 2005 horror movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which I do like that movie. It has been a while since I watched it, but I remember liking it. And unfortunately, he did the awful 2008 sci-fi movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, the remake starring Keanu Reeves. And Keanu Reeves, in my opinion, is a great actor, but I will say this, I was not a fan of the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still. I thought that was a terrible remake of a classic sci-fi movie. Now, luckily, this movie's a huge improvement over The Day the Earth Stood Still remake. And then, because of the success of this movie, Scott Derrickson would go on to direct other movies like the 2014 horror movie, Deliver Us from Evil, starring Eric Bana, which I know that that's a very divisive movie, but I rather liked it. I thought it was an underrated movie. And after that, Scott Derrickson, he would go on to direct the 2016 superhero movie Doctor Strange. He did not direct the sequel, but he did direct the first movie. And then he directed the Black Phone, which I recently reviewed. And I would say I do prefer the Black Phone over this movie, but I personally still do like Sinister. So without further ado, let's get into my review. Now, when Sinister came out in 2012, it was a big box office hit, and it received positive reviews from critics and audiences, praising the cast's performance in the eerie atmosphere. And yeah, so without further ado, let's get into my reviews. So the movie starts off where, and I will say, this movie is pretty creepy. The movie starts off where there is film footage from a Film 8 camera, which, yeah, a really old retro camera. Basically, the cameras where you put, like, the tape that goes around in a circle in it. Yeah, one of those. The movie starts off with film footage from that of, like, and really creepy imagery of a family hanging from a tree. Again, this movie does have some eerie imagery like that, and I think that Scott Derrickson did a good job nailing that in this movie. We are then introduced to the main character of the movie, Ellison Oswald, played by Ethan Hawke, who, like I said, he's basically a true crime writer, and basically he's a guy that writes stories about true crime. And over a decade ago, Ellison was a really popular writer back in the day. Like, he wrote this very popular book that gained attention, but his last couple of books have not really done that great. So he's hoping that he can, get a book that's like gonna sell money. And in the movie, he goes to this house and he moves his family to the house and stuff like that. But throughout the course of the movie, we all see that's a mistake, because Ellison, the character played by Ethan Hawke, he decides to take a look at these disturbing videotapes on the Film 8 camera. And Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, he basically finds this film of, like I said, he basically finds a film showing the deaths of a family that, the previous owners that lived in the house that died and stuff like that. And again, it's pretty gruesome. And another thing, throughout the course of the movie, not only does it take a toll on Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, it also has a toll on his family too. Like, for example, early on in the movie, Ellison's son, aka Ethan Hawke's character's son, he's at school, but basically what happens is that the mother, there's a scene early on in the movie where the mother is yelling at her son because the son at school he got in trouble on the first day because he basically drew a dead body. He basically drew a tree with the 4 people hanging off of it, of the dead bodies in the previous house, and the mother tells him to go upstairs and stuff like that. So it's taking a toll on his family too. And one thing I will say I do really like about this movie is the father and daughter dynamic. I thought that Ellison Oswald, played by Ethan Hawke, gave a good performance, and you definitely bought the fact that he was a guy that cared for his kids. And in fact, early on in the movie, when Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, moves into the house, his daughter basically says to him, "I miss my old school. I want to be back with my old friends." And then Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, he promises his daughter that we got to see how things play out, but if none of us end up liking the new house, then we can move back to our old house. And the daughter's happy about that. And the dad's like, "But you got to promise me you're going to try to be excited to go to school tomorrow." And he says, "Can you do that for me?" And then she says, "Yes, I can," and stuff like that. And the dad specifically has one rule. The daughter, she can paint in her room, but she cannot paint outside of that. A pretty simple rule. And there is a part in this movie at about the 29-minute mark where Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, he's going through these videotapes. Not videotapes. These basically going through film on a Film 8 camera. He basically sees he goes back to the image of the family hanging from the tree, but he zooms in on the background. He zooms in on the background because he has a computer that he filmed this off of, and he notices that there's this creepy supernatural looking face on the camera. Now, it's only very brief because it is at a far distance, but he zooms in on the camera and he sees this really creepy ghost entity with no eyes, but like black reins around around these parts, but no eyes, and very creepy, effective imagery. And I thought that Mr. Boogie, aka the Boogle, the main villain of the movie, the sinister supernatural presence, played by Nicolas Cage, I thought the actor gave a great performance as this villain, because he never talked. He just was like there and quiet, kind of like Michael Myers. So definitely some creepy atmosphere of this movie, as I will say that. And then, throughout the course of the movie, it gets crazier. Like, Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, he's basically up in the attic as Ellison. He hears a very strange noise in the attic, thinking that an intruder broke in. He goes up to the attic, and he basically finds, not a videotape, but like, he basically finds like this, he finds a drawing of, once again, 4 people hanging by a tree and Mr. Boogie right by it. And, Ellison doesn't know quite what to think of it. and then he hears a noise again, so he starts walking in the attic, and then he falls through the floor and, gets hurt. But then, the police officers show up and they wrap up his foot in a bandage and say, we're not going to force you to go, but if your foot's in any more pain, tell us immediately and go to the hospital to get it treated and stuff like that. And also, throughout the movie, Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, he is trying to get to the bottom of this mystery, but throughout the movie, actually, the police, yes, that's right, the police deputy himself, played by James Roseanne, actually tries to help him out. Because he's basically telling him about these events that, like, Ellison, he's basically telling the deputy there were these murders, going all the way back to 1966, and then the guy's like, wait a minute, that would make the killer at least 70 years old, at least, his 70s, and, like, making him a bit skeptical on it. But throughout the course of the movie, we see that, that it's really affecting Ellison's family. Like, there's a scene in the movie where Ellison is inside of his own house and stuff like that. He climbs up to the attic as, he's in bed with his wife, but he hears the Film 8 camera turn on by itself. He goes upstairs. He sees some creepy ghost children, and then Mr. Boogie's face appears right in front of Ellison, aka Ethan Hawke's face, and this scares him so much that he falls down and stuff like that. And the next day, when Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, is at home, the daughter disobeys her father, the one rule, you can only paint in your rooms, and Ellison basically, Ellison's daughter basically paints a girl, she paints a girl on the wall outside of her room, and it's a girl on a swing set, and it's the girl who previously lived in the house, who was one of the victims. And then Ellison's wife asks, who is that, sweetie? She says, Stephanie, the girl who previously lived here and stuff like that. And no, not Stephanie. The daughter basically, the daughter Stephanie says that was the person who previously lived here and stuff like that. And I painted this for her because I felt bad and stuff like that. And then the mother and the father, they get into a big argument, and she was like, we should have never moved here, like you only did, this book's only for you and stuff like that. But then, and throughout the course of the movie, we see that, again, stuff starts to get more sinister, as the title of the movie suggests, and it's not exactly going great. And then there's a really creepy scene where Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, is walking around his house, and then, like, there's like he sees, like, he doesn't see it, but as the audience, we basically see what we think is possibly Ethan Hawke, aka Ellison's daughter, possessed. Either that or someone disguised as it, and like she's following him when he's not looking. And again, very creepy, effective imagery. But then and then we get to the 1 hour 27-minute mark of the movie, and Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, he realizes it was a mistake to move to the house and stuff like that. And so because of that, Ellison, played by Ethan Hawke, he decides to take all the film footage and burn it, and he basically says to his wife, you were right, we got to get out of here, it was a mistake to move here. So then the family moved back to where they originally lived, and stuff like that. However, we learned that just because they moved doesn't mean they're entirely safe. And now, I'm not going to spoil the ending for those who haven't seen the movie, but all I'm going to say is that as much as I like this movie, I'm not a fan of the ending. I thought the ending of this movie sucked. In fact, many people who even like this movie would agree with that. And I know they did a sequel to this, but I heard the sequel was terrible and it wasn't as good as the first one, but Scott Derrickson did not come back to direct it, so that's probably why it sucked. I really don't have an interest to check out the second one. Maybe someday I'll watch it just to see how bad it is, but I'm not in any big hurry. But yeah, at the end of the day, I thought that Sinister was a pretty good horror film, and this is a movie I would recommend. So yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, I am going to give Sinister from 2012 a 9 out of 10. So yeah, Thank you guys so much for watching my review, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Later.